So today we are joined by Mr. Greg Sellar, international keynote speaker, corporate trainer, coach, designer of the Life Hack program, all-round rhythmical guy, which we might get into later, but maybe not.
Be careful, Phil.
Yeah.
Be careful. Be careful how rhythmic we get in this.
Yeah, we won't
have your own rhythmic skeletons to unleash in this call, so be very careful.
We won't reminisce too far, but Greg, welcome on the podcast. Thank you for taking the time. You're in a completely different time zone to us at present, so thank you for taking the time in your early morning to join us.
That's all right. That's all right. It's the sacrifice we make when the sun is shining down here in Sydney, Australia.
Splendid. So, Greg, I mean, where do we start? I guess one of the key things really is about kind of where your journey's taken you, which we kind of want to talk about, because right now you're doing a lot of keynote stuff, you're doing a lot of leadership stuff, you're doing a lot of stuff. I think on your site you describe yourself as hustling the dark horse. Is it the dark horse generation to claim their mojo back? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Do you want to expand on that? Because that will then make more sense to the listeners.
Yeah. Well, the thing is like I'm firmly a member of Gen X. So, we sit in the middle at the moment at this point in time where we're kind of old enough to be raising families, but we're also young enough to be looking after, parents who potentially are getting older, God willing that they're actually still with us at all. So, I find that there's a lot of focus on the kind of baby boomers and, setting up for retirement. Have they set up for retirement and they're off doing their thing? And then there's a lot of focus in that whole like Gen Z millennial, they're coming up and through the ranks, entering the workforce. What does it all mean? And then you just kind of get this silent majority in the middle who are actually kind of the workhorses in society a lot of the time. And I know that's a fair generalization, but for me, when I moved back to Sydney after being 17 years in London, I've really just hit 40 and I was like, wow, okay, kind of what's next? What's happening? Where do I go from here? What's career and fitness going to maybe look like for somebody in their 40s and indeed 50s and potentially 60s? Or is it time for a change? How do I best use the skills that I've developed and maybe take them somewhere else?
Cool. So I think just to add a little bit of context to the people that don't know you, if we just go back maybe 20 years, you said, 17 years in London, what were you doing in London? What was your day-to-day, what was going on?
Yeah. So I trained to be a group fitness instructor back in 1992. So that was very, very firmly in the kind of step and aerobic days. And then I kind of, I did a degree in exercise science. I got a bachelor's in that. And then I was pretty much teaching at most of the conventions down here in this area of the world, along with most of the best gyms, I would say, in the Sydney area. And I guess you kind of just reach that ceiling quite early of like, well, unless you go elsewhere and try and expand a little bit your horizons, then you are going to be just limited to Australia. So I was advised, like, look, come to London. There's lots of work going on there. The industry there is evolving. You had companies like FitPro kicking off and holding the mantle for the education piece for instructors. Les Mills had just come into the foray over there. So that was a fairly new thing for them. And I had been trained in a few of the programs previously. So I got used as a trainer over there. So I kind of did land with my bum in the butter a little bit when I came over in 1998. Because the guys at FitPro were just like, great, welcome. We'll definitely use you. So I'd say within the first kind of 2 weeks, I was like slotted onto the Les Mills team. I went out on tour for FitPro with KK Choreography Club 5, I think. So, you're on the front cover of their magazine at the conventions and also doing the European circuit pretty quickly. So it was definitely a kind of heady ride of the wave, and I loved it. But back then, schlepping, 17 to 20 classes a week, module training on the weekend. But I always had a fascination in music, A, and B, the kind of speaking side of things, just the art of articulation, teaching. I probably, if the pay wasn't so crappy, I might have ended up being a teacher at some point. And it was the best of both worlds for me. And so I just rode that for a long, long time. Ended up doing 55 countries, and eventually working for the likes of Nike, looking after some of the Nike Training Club trainers in London and Sydney. Doing a lot.
And at that particular time, FitPro was, certainly in the UK, FitPro was kind of the fitness sort of convention, and it was part of that whole fitness culture, wasn't it? There wasn't really anything else. It wasn't like the Body Powers and the other kind of conventions that were going on. FitPro was the biggie, wasn't it? And I recall a couple of them that I went to where thousands and thousands of people at these things, and I think I recall seeing you teach a class where there's about 600 or 700 people in it. It was mad.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been unheard of, like back in those days. I mean, group fitness was it really. There was those guys, and then you also had the Blackpool guys, the guys who run International Fitness Showcase now. They were the two kind of big events. FitPro at the time had two, so they actually did Birmingham, and then they did Coventry. And it was an essential part of the yearly calendar. They would fly international people to come in. There'd be lots of lectures. Personal training was clearly there and important, but it was nothing like it is today. You literally train to be a Group X instructor to come into the fitness industry, as opposed to now training to be a personal trainer to come into the fitness industry, and maybe Group X is this kind of side hustle thing that you got going on to teach boot camps or something like that. Yeah, so it's a very different focus.
Sorry, and I'm assuming at that point there was there keynote speakers at these conventions that you were sort of seeing do their thing?
Yeah, there was a keynote speaker. Typically, it would be somebody that would come over. So they would do a kind of glorified version in the sports hall with everybody in there. And I did have a couple of friends who did it early on, and just to see the amount of work and preparation that went into it, but also to understand, like, it's a very different beast when you're keynote speaking, because you don't, for me anyway, you don't have we've been workshop training for years and years and years, but you get up there and you don't have the backup, I guess, to be able to say, okay, well, if things are falling a little bit flat, hey, we'll just put the music on. Let's get moving now. You know what I mean? It's your oration, it's your story. It's getting that kind of emotional, make them laugh, make them cry, but it is literally coming from that kind of space in your head. Your mouth.
And that's a phenomenal, skill. And I guess a lot of people are seeing it now, from home, right? They're seeing these great, class instructors essentially, but they're not in these halls of hundreds of thousands of people. They're in these, they're in these recording studios, and there's these people getting involved with. I know that there's the Fit program. There's Les Mills are doing stuff, aren't they? They're doing all this remote stuff with COVID and everything that's hit. So there's this next generation of kind of fitness or class instructors who aren't really teaching classes to people. They're kind of teaching them on a screen and getting all these other people to do it. So you've clearly picked up along this way this ability to, communicate, vocalize instruction in some kind of sense, and getting all these people coordinated, doing what they're doing. So from that, where did this kind of next evolution of Greg sort of occur, where you decided, right, I'm going to take these skills and I'm going to start to apply them to things that I can relate back to my experiences in the industry, and the things that potentially that you've got right, and also the things you've got wrong, right? And go, right, I'm going to teach this next generation how to manage things better. And, was it the life hack program that came about first, or how did that then evolve?
Yeah, no, so like I said, I moved back in probably 2014, and I just was about to turn 40. So I was 39 going on 40. And I just thought, okay, like, what are you going to do now? What's going to be different? I'm not as a 40-year-old going to be like going backwards into the industry and working in a gym, per se. So, okay, what are you going to do then? What interests you? And I actually did a short course here by Wellness Australia. A friend of mine who actually I used to work with, I think when I was about 17, she owned a gym. and she had moved into that kind of corporate training space. And she said to me, look, I would love to use you when you come back as a trainer and facilitator. However, we would need to work on your coaching ability. And I was like, coaching? Like, I got that. Like, that's what I do. Really not understanding like what a coach was. I didn't understand the idea of the art of coaching and the idea of like being able to elicit, deeper meaning problems and helping people join the dots. And for me, when I just went through, it was a really short course, just to module 1. It was like literally one of those lightning bolts went off. Because I just thought, wow, this is the missing link. Not only for me personally, because I'd always kind of yo-yoed. I had an event coming up, I'd train like a dog, lose some weight. I didn't have an event coming on, I'd stop my face. And so I was like, what is this mentality? Where does it come from? And it was the idea that the thinking actually becomes the most probably important part, because we all knew how to train. We all knew how to eat. And yet we didn't train necessarily in the right way, or we didn't eat necessarily the right things to achieve our goals. And so I thought this is just like the perfect missing link for, the industry, but it really at the time wasn't something that people were talking a lot about. You'd go to a convention or there'd be a couple of small courses around behavior change, but it certainly wasn't this great big strand that we see operating in the industry today. So just very serendipitously, in coming back here, there's a company called Fitness Network Australia, which was kind of like a sister company to FitPro over there, loose ties. And I just said, look, this is what I was thinking, this is what I was doing. And they said, oh, this is really weird, but we're actually talking to a training company down in Melbourne. We want to contextualize their coaching course for trainers in the fitness industry. So they paired me with a coach. They said, look, go down, we'll pay for you to do the course, which was a diploma in coaching, leadership, and mentoring. And I came out as an accredited International Coaching Federation coach. So I was like, great, here we go. And then for whatever reason, that relationship didn't end up pairing out between the training company and Fitness Network Australia. So I was like, oh, well, what do I do now? And they're like, it's our fault, it's not yours. So go be a coach. Well done. So I was like, okay, cool. As a result of that, we had done a few short workshops, and I was actually paired with a coach from Fire Up, which was the training company. And her name was Terry Lynn. She'd been working a lot in corporate. And I guess somebody that she was working with closely put a call out and said, look, I don't suppose you know of anyone who's got like a half decent talent to be able to speak and run training days and things like that, and is an accredited coach. And she said, you know what, you should talk to Greg. And so I met Tony at 360. And I would say within 6 months, I was kind of flying all over Australia doing leadership training. Yeah, it's very thinking based anyway. And it took all of like the coaching skills. I had to learn new material around a kind of curriculum of about 8 different courses. And yeah, off I went. So he had big national clients, some of them in the electrical retail industry, some of them in national broadcasting. And so, yeah, I just was like, wow, this is amazing. Not only do I get to talk on what my passion was, but I also get to kind of utilize the skills that I developed along the way as a Les Mills trainer, as a presenter, as a trainer in the industry, but actually take it off in there. What was really interesting is that anyone who found out my background in corporate was actually probably just as, if not more, interested in that. So there is this thing in the industry that I think sometimes we can sell ourselves a little bit short on the talents that we have developed or the knowledge that we have in the corporate setting, because you let them know what you've done in that space, and that's all they want to talk about.
I think it's almost like a respect for people's background, isn't it? I think when you know a little bit more about where someone came from and what kind of skills they've developed along that way, and even we've a lot of the podcasts I get to talk to people about hardships, things they've been through in life that have ultimately carved out this mentality, this mindset, whatever it might be, and alongside that then sits all the life experiences, all the things they've done, you know, however diverse it might be. You know, it might be a job they had once upon a time, or it might be an experience they had, or they went traveling, or whatever it might be. And all of these things culminate in obviously where they are at that precise moment. So I'm guessing that, you know, you moved into corporate, and I'm guessing a lot of the people probably in corporate were probably similar age group to you, were they?
Yeah. I mean, one particular corporate that we worked with, you know, you got the kind of run of the gamut. There was a little bit of a skew towards some younger people, but I also have contracts at the moment with a pharmaceutical company. They tend to be my age or a little bit older. People are people, and that's the one thing that's given me confidence over the last couple of years is, you know, you do walk into it a little bit with the imposter syndrome, where you feel like if
Yeah.
somebody's really well read and that they have self-development be a consistent part of their life, that you're only just one step ahead of them. But at the end of the day, you know, when you're in it every day and you're talking to the number of people that you end up talking to, either on trainings or from the corporate speaking side of things, or even just on a one-to-one coaching basis, you end up seeing enough to know that most people have very, very similar problems and they've all got them. So the context might be a little bit different in terms of what it is in the relationship, or the stress that they have between work-life balance, or the idea of some kind of conflict at work, or just how their thinking is being carried over from old thinking that they've carried from their childhood. You know, once they get to that understanding, helping them actually join the dots becomes a lot easier, because you just hear and see a lot of the same things from time to time. And so whilst there's a lot of uniqueness based on the person and their story, a lot of the time the actual outcome or the action plan that they need to put in place can tend to be fairly similar.
And ultimately, you know, we're talking about behavioral change here, right? Is that how do these people take this kind of, you know, we'll get into the kind of nuts and bolts of what you do and how you break it all down, but how are these people taking, because, you know, I know certainly with, you know, the experience I've had in the industry, if I come across someone with almost like a blank canvas, right? They've never trained before, they don't understand nutrition, you've got this blank canvas in which you can imprint this method or way of doing things on these people. And it's much easier than somebody who's done, you know, 10, 15 different styles or types of things and kind of got it wrong, right? You know, it's like someone with bad habits. So you're going into these corporate environments and you're going in teaching leadership, right? You know, a skill which we know is distinctly lacking a lot of time in certainly the people further down the ranks, where ultimately they've all got to be leaders, right? Just in their own little domain. And eventually that cascades through the company, right? But how do these people take this stuff on board, and what's kind of the compliance rate? Do you find that people embrace it all and go, wow, you know, I've had this revelation, I've had this, you know, this missing link, like you put it, and said, you know, it's this light bulb moment, this lightning bolt that's stuck in my head, and it makes sense. It makes sense for me to make these changes, because ultimately the outcome is going to be far more productive, and the outcome is going to be more in line with actually what I want as an outcome.
I think there's the bell curve. Like you get the
always the bell curve.
There's always a bell curve. Yeah. Like at one end, you get people who are absolutely, you know, resistant to it. And that comes with confidence, being able to poke them enough and challenge them enough around questioning, or to try and help them see, particularly in language, how some of their language actually sets them up for failure. You know, the idea that it's the opposite of, well, they're at the wrong side of cause and effect. You know, they spend a lot of time at the effect. Oh, people do this to me, the world's terrible, like people at work, you know, people at home, everybody else, rather than actually being at the cause side of things, where they take a personal responsibility and accountability for their own thinking and ultimately behavior. So that's number one. Number two, well, you get the end of the bell curve where people really push back. So they're at the wrong side of cause and effect. Can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's just the way it is. You know, I don't want to rock the boat too much. You know, or even if I say anything, nothing changes. That's just my life. And particularly around mindset and that work of Carol Dweck, you know, it falls into that fixed mindset side of things, where they don't physically believe that their effort results in any change in their circumstances, that their capabilities are set in stone. Then you get this generic middle who I think fall into what we call the knowing doing gap. Like, they hear it enough times, but you kind of have to beat them over the stick. You know what I mean? Like, enough times for them to go, yes, but then I go and do stuff I know is not great for me. Yes, but then I go and do something that's not great for me.
Is that just people reverting back to old behaviors?
Yeah, like it's tough. Like it's
that's
tough.
all it is, yeah.
So when you say people come to you with a blank canvas, nobody comes to us with a blank canvas.
Of course, yeah.
They might come to you with a blank canvas on the training side of things. I've never lifted a weight in my life. I've never really looked at my nutrition before. That's a blank canvas, regardless of what's gone on before. But in thinking and behavior, like, this is stuff going back to, that early developmental childhood stage, 0 to 6. Like, if you don't get the kids by then, I think Aristotle once said, show me a kid of 6 and I'll show you the man. And it's like, true. You know what I mean? Those neural pathways get set, and it's really like the freeway is already there. And at this point, all we can hope to do is build little kind of off ramps, in new ways of thinking. So I think in the middle, there's that knowing doing gap. I know what I'm supposed to do. Phil's told me I'm not supposed to eat this crap. When I go home after I train with him, or, I go do a seminar with Phil and I get hyped up and I'm in that motivation thing, but like 2.5 weeks later, I'm back doing whatever I did. So they know what they're supposed to do. They're just not doing it. And I find that the more we get to see the knowing doing gap eventually closes and closes and closes. Human nature says we're always going to fall off the wagon, but at least the depth and the breadth of that fall is much shorter and not as deep. And then you get the people at this end of the bell curve who it just like changes everything. Just one
just
thing.
Embrace it all and go, right, this is me now.
They don't even need to embrace it all. They just need to embrace like 1 or 2 key points that can completely revolutionize the way that they think. Like, for example, let's say people have a want to, in coaching, listen better and change the way that they question. So as a result of me listening better and trying to suspend judgment as I listen, which is one of the most super hard things to do as a listener, because it's a skill and not necessarily like a kind of a sense. It's something that can be worked on. Let's say they work on their listening, and as a result of that, they just move more towards open-ended questions rather than making statements, and those open-ended questions are on the basis of what they get back from the other person. So they get this kind of continuing, deepening conversation that goes on. Then they get to more the root cause of what the problem is really, because it's not often what first presents, and then they have a better outcome. Let's just say those 2 things is something that, lands for a person. It revolutionizes everything. So it's the way that they address conflict in the workplace. They take it home. They talk to their kids in a better way. They have a better relationship. They ask themselves better questions when the inner critic goes off. So, they don't have to embrace everything. Sometimes it's just that 1% that is enough to really get people over the line. But we've had like tremendous success stories of people who, even just now in having for corporate over the last 12 months done developing resilience workshops, the way these guys come back at the 12-month mark saying, I've gone from sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, completely stressed off my head. I'm at least getting 7 now, preferably 8. It's changed the way that I do this. It's moved that. I now spend time meditating, whatever it is to move their life forward. And once that they get any level of success, we tend to find that there is momentum there. They want more. That's when they start reading a couple of books, they'll watch a TEDx talk, they'll have a date night with their partner. So it does snowball.
So, you mentioned the work of sort of Carol Dweck, right, who sort of established those 2 criteria of growth mindset versus fixed mindset, right? So if you can switch someone from that fixed mindset into that growth mindset, all of a sudden their world essentially changes, right? They're looking at things from a different perspective, and their view on almost like a defeatist or a successful view on things changes, right?
Yeah, I can remember reading that book on a plane, and I'm still to this day not sure, because they suck oxygen out of the plane, at height, and you become more emotional.
Yeah.
Like, you watch a movie that's probably not that sad, but you end up bawling your eyes out. Um, I had tears welling in my eye because I read her book Mindset on the plane.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I have spent most of my life in a fixed mindset. That idea that, like, my success, it was particularly around success. Like, my success was dependent on what everybody else was doing. So if you're more successful, Phil, for whatever reason, that means I might have a little bit less success. Like, it's a finite pool.
Yeah, you're almost you're resentful of other people moving forward, right?
Pretty much. I wasn't resentful, but I was happy for them. I was happy for them, but it's almost like my happiness for them was at a cost to me.
Yeah.
And I was threatened by it, like completely threatened by it, because I just didn't know where I stood in any of it. There was this other thing about having the belief or the knowledge that I could do a lot of things, but for whatever reason, there was just a fear of not failure. I wasn't really fearful of failure, but it was also that, like, fear of success, of like, what would it actually mean if I could get Lifehack out there into the world? Like, what would I have to do? I'm quite comfortable where I am. I don't really need to push the boat out too far, because that's only going to cause more work, and yada, yada, yada. And I went from there. And I was just like, I can see exactly where it comes from. Blame the parents.
Do you want to get into that?
Yeah, you can do. I can see exactly where it comes from. Everybody's going to have something from back there, and it only comes through awareness that you can even think about starting to change it. Because most people go through their day, they don't even know that they're doing it. They don't even know where it comes from. So it's certainly not on their radar to change it unless it's brought up to them.
And it's remarkable when I hear people say that, especially people because again, I would have never put you in that bracket and thought, Greg's not very confident about his delivery, or he's not, he doesn't have that kind of mindset of somebody who's progressive and blah blah blah. I'd have never put you in that kind of state. So what brought you to that point way back then where you felt you weren't doing enough, or you weren't succeeding where you were, what caused you to chase that money?
Purely money.
Yeah.
My self-worth was, and still slightly is, but I'm training myself out of it, my net worth. My self-worth was my net worth. My bank balance was great, cooking with gas. Here we go. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Bank balance not so great. And I'm like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, he's got a big bank balance. She's really got an amazing thing, and she's out there doing all this stuff, and he's got this new program going, and they're over there doing that, and they must be generating loads. She's just bought a new car. He's just managed to blah, blah, X, Y, Z. You know what the story is. And it's like, it's just the comparison game. Like, where do you sit? But for me, it wasn't about the person. It was about their financial status.
And do you think, we talked, obviously the first thing we kind of touched on was the whole generation thing. Do you think that's a generational thing? Because obviously, we had, our parents grew up in a different generation, and their outlook on things was, back then, I think people were either pessimistic or they're optimistic. There was just those two sort of things, right? You either had someone who was optimistic about everything, or they were pessimistic about everything. And obviously in our generation, it then became this, and this is what I feel about our generation, is that we were kind of forced into this thing where you had to make a good living, and a good living was dictated by finances, right? It was dictated by how much money you had. So do you think that's a generational thing that we were taught to kind of chase the dollar as such?
It can be, because I think we were probably much the first generation where this whole, like, I'll use the example of owning an additional property.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, when I grew up, the measure of success was, well, you'll know you're successful, you know, and you want to safeguard yourself in terms of security by having an additional property. So that's kind of like the measure of success. So like I went and got 6. You know what I
just
mean?
went out and thought, I'll get 6 of those.
Like it just, like between me and my other half, we just kept going and going and going and going. And so, you know, then you get to this point now where it's like we make things so complicated for ourselves because the very least thing that having those 6 properties made us feel was secure, because you're always kind of juggling and tenant in here and the washing machine's broken over there, and you're moving stuff around all the time, and it can get tough. You know, you can be stretched from time to time. So it's almost like all the external is filling your cup, you know, and the one thing I wasn't doing is like filling my cup, like doing stuff for me that is going to make me feel like I am a whole person in order for me to then go out and fill other people's cups. So it was never a confidence thing around like, I don't know how to train, I don't know how to speak, I feel nervous getting up on stage. It was never anything about that. It was, what's wrong with me? In that I have all of this confidence, I know what I can do and what my capabilities are, because nobody has ever told me anything other than you're amazing at what you do. Yeah, I've had feedback from time to time, which is great. It's always constructive, and I've always taken that and learned from the best. But when you have some of the best saying you are great at what you do, like you go, okay. My problem was, if I have this capability, why aren't I fulfilling my potential? Like, what's the interference between here and here? Because I do speak better than a lot of people in the fitness industry. I do train a lot better than other people in terms of getting an outcome. I'm recognized for all of this with, you know, awards and whatnot. So how come I'm not making X, Y, Z? And that was the biggest kind of gap for me. And it was all in here.
And this took a long time for the penny to drop, the proverbial penny to drop, right? It's, you know, you're saying, you know, you got to almost 40 when you're like, oh, hold on, there needs to be a revelation here. I need to change my outlook on things. Otherwise, would it be, you'd be eternally chasing something that was never there? Or how do you think?
So I did I did a thing called the Lifestyles Inventory. It's by a company called Human Synergistics. And so Terry Lynn, who I mentioned before, she was my coach friend. In the coaching leadership space, the one thing that I find that you have to do is you have to have some kind of metric. So there has to be a metric or a tool by which you are kind of measured against a standardized norm to actually know how you're going and thinking and behavior. Because if I came into, let's say you pulled together staff at a corporate event or facility, I came in and did a day, and we did a leadership day. And they're like, what is leadership? And what do you take to be leadership? And what are the key characteristics of leadership? Like, most people could answer that stuff because they've read a few books or whatever. But how do you actually know where you sit on that scale? You might think you're a rock star, yet everybody around you thinks you're a complete asshole, you know, or you might think you might be treating yourself so poorly and everybody around you thinks you're a superstar. You know, so like, how do you actually know unless there's some metric? So Human Synergistics have a lifestyles inventory. It's set on a circumplex, kind of a diagnostic tool, and it's around 12 thinking and behavior styles. So Terry Lynn, I remember her as clear as day giving it to me. And it's divided into 3 clusters. So you've got constructive styles, which are blue. Everybody wants to see those in their ideal leader. It's about being humanistic. It's about being achievement-oriented, very self-actualized as a leader in person. Then you got your passive defensive styles. They're set in green. And passive defensive are all about a move away from energy. So you seek external approval from others. You're very conventional. You don't think that ideas are as important as like sticking to the rules. You're very dependent. So there's that kind of neediness in you for self-esteem and backup. And then there's red. So the red's actually aggressive defensive. So it's a very move toward energy, power, control, oppositional, being cynical, blaming others for mistakes. But the one thing that is in the red, and that's where I was off the charts, when I first did it. So much so that I remember
I was thinking that when you stating them, I'm thinking red's the place you don't want to be.
Red's the place. Well, yeah. I mean, look, there's different reds. And I was competitive. So that was one of the reds in the fall. So I was competitive, but again, not in a natural kind of healthy competition way. Like if I wasn't going to win, I almost didn't want to play the game. Yeah. So that sits in that space of like, being overly competitive. But the one thing that was off the charts, I was perfectionistic. So perfectionistic tendencies is where the person places so much induced stress on themselves to be perfect, and like you said before, they set these unnecessarily high, unrealistic targets that they never can quite meet. And so it sets up for a very dissatisfying life. I would have an amazing achievement. Like something would happen in my career and people would come up and say, oh my God, that's so amazing. Like, but you must be so happy. And I go, yeah, cool, thanks. And in my head, all I would do is raise the bar.
So it would never be good enough, right?
Never be good enough. And so, yeah, you could get a win, but there's no celebration of the win. There's no patting on the back. There's no recognition that you've done a good job. It's just like, oh, yeah, it was good. But what if I could do it again? Plus 5%, 10%. What if I could do it in another country and get the same recognition? Like, you just keep moving it around. And it's stressful. Like, it's stressful.
This is something obviously we hear a lot about. There's a lot of talk around leadership and leadership styles and things like this nowadays. Where once upon a time it was nobody really talked about it. It was just you had a leader and that was it. Somebody was designated that role because of certain attributes that probably if you were to assess them, they'd all be there, right? You just find the leader out of, like when at school you'd find the leader out of a group of kids who would become the captain of the team or whatever it might be. So out of this, this interpretation of yourself, and you found out these, this perfectionist trait where you're chasing this kind of endless goal where you just shift the goalposts every time you achieve something. How did you then deal with that? So how have you, reverted back and thought, right, how do I manage this? How do I look after this going forward for myself?
Well, one thing, like I remember somebody asking me is like, well, how will you know when you are successful? And it was a question I'd never asked myself ever. Like, what defines success for you? Like, if that's what you're kind of chasing, then what is it? Is it having stability? Is it having $50,000 in the bank? Is it having a mortgage paid off? Is it having a successful relationship? Like, what is it? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I'd never truly answered, well, what is it that you actually want? Because I just was in that pursuit of like, well, just more than what I have. Yeah, but like there has to be a ceiling on that. Otherwise you're going to be 73 just going like trying to climb and get to this. Yeah, exactly. And so, I had to sit down and bring an awareness to that. I think the other thing is to, once you have the awareness, just to look at the thinking that goes on inside your head, and typically the kind of words that the inner critic will say, that whole like self-talk, because a perfectionist person is going to be super hard on themselves because they almost have the frame of, if I'm my own worst critic, then whatever I hear is almost not going to be as bad as whatever I've already told myself, number one. Or two, they place such high expectations on themselves that it's just unrealistic. And so what they have on the circumplex is in the blue, right next to that red in perfectionistic, is achievement-based thinking. So I had to understand, how do I get more into the achievement side where the outcome is the same? I can still achieve a level of success, but the journey is more constructive. Yeah. So I'm not placing that heaviness on myself. It's almost like kind of just learning to like roll with the punches, go with the flow, and enjoy. Somebody gave me a great metaphor the other day. They were like, one is like literally in life on a roller coaster, holding onto the bar, and just closing your eyes, going, like on the roller coaster ride. And the other is literally like sticking your hands in the air and going, whoa, you know what I mean? It's the same roller coaster. It's the same kind of highs and lows and corkscrews and whatever. But one, you are completely like wishing that you weren't on the ride, and the other is like, yeah, well, I'm loving this. So whatever the journey is, just lightening the load on yourself, putting the right amount of effort in, and just realizing that if you put the effort in, something's going to happen eventually, versus, well, there's no worth putting the effort in because I know I won't be able to do that.
Okay, so what are your markers? So what are you chasing?
What am I chasing at the moment? For me, there is a financial. No. For me, there's a financial dollar amount. Yeah. Yep. And so independent of anybody else, independent of the money of a partner, independent of whatever, there's a financial dollar amount that by 31st of December, I want to kick towards. That's on the financial side of things.
Yep.
And on the other side of things is a sense of freedom and lightness.
Okay.
So in the journey of getting to whatever, that I just keep it light and keep it happy. You know what I mean? So rather than getting up and losing that sense of thought of like, and again, listening to the language of linguistics, I have to, I've got to do that today. Like, oh no, I have to get that finished by Friday. I ought to, I should, I could, you hear that type of language, and I know I've kind of slipped back a little, because it almost presupposes that I'm not wanting control and it's something that I'm doing for somebody else rather than doing it for me. So I try and replace the linguistics of it with things like, I want to, I'd love to, I choose to. And that very simple shift, it does reframe a lot of the kind of what's going on day to day.
So is that, you talk about this kind of this internal voice, but how do you remind yourself to, to keep that voice in that narrative? Do you journal? Do you write it down? Do you have, motivational notes on your fridge? I mean, how do you remind yourself that you have to think in that way? When you find yourself slipping back into that mentality and that vocabulary, how are you then going, Greg, stop doing that? You need to rephrase that.
Yeah. So I have the 5-minute journal. So morning and night, which is basic gratitude journal. It takes a couple of minutes, just 3 things that you're grateful for, 3 things that are going to make today amazing. And you set up a positive affirmation, typically starting with I am. So first thing, like literally bedside table, don't look at your phone, don't do anything else, either before or after you shower. Set the day with that kind of intention. I also do the flip side as the last thing before night. So I'll go and fill the bottom half of the page with 3 things that did make today amazing, 3 things that happened, and 1 thing that I would potentially change for tomorrow. And what you do on a daily basis is you start to see in that last section just how often the same things come up. And for me, it was always the word that I wrote most was worry. Okay. What would you love to do tomorrow? Not worry so much about da-da-da. Not get caught up in worrying about blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, okay, well, worry now, is a bit of a theme around like...
Trigger word almost?
Yeah, well, just for me, where is the worry coming from? What are you uncertain about? You're uncertain about the volatility of this particular client. Could they be there? Could they not be there? You're worried about like January being a quieter month for you and not getting started till February again. What does that mean to this goal? How does that affect a couple of other things? So worry. Why are you worrying? What do you now got to do to not worry so much? And then in between that, I actually have I know this is going to sound a bit weird. It's not a safe word. It's actually an action that I do with my hand. Like I literally, when I get caught in the kind of spiral of like downward thinking, and it's quick.
Yeah,
it's quick. Like, so I just might go, oh God, I haven't written those manuals yet. You know, I told him I'd have him by the end of December. How realistically can I get him? But that's going to mean that da 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 da. No 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 no. Greg, bang bang, and then I just do that 1 2 3.
Yeah.
Which is literally a kind of like just a little cue for forget the thinking, move it on, get out of your headspace. I literally will go, Greg, 1 2 3, with my hand, and it's almost like a safe word for me, like a tap out in wrestling
Yeah.
or whatever, just to be able to say, kill it, like enough.
It's interesting because we were talking just a couple of weeks ago with a chap who's involved with elite sport and deals with people in cricket. And one of the things he was mentioning and he was talking about is that it's the breakdown of these little mannerisms that cricketers have, where they have this little routine that they go through. And he recited his own routine. And I said, well, you know, is this something that you were aware of earlier in your career? He said, no. He said, this is something that later on in my career, I realized I did. And I realized the purpose behind doing it. And he actually pointed towards an elite bowler, actually an Australian bowler. And he said he used to really struggle because what would happen is he'd move towards the wicket before he bowled the ball and he'd have all these doubts come up in his head. And what would end up doing, he'd make a bad decision and it would just be horrendous. So what they got him doing was just basically counting. So he just counted his strides. And that little sequence of 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, and he knew that when he'd gone past that number, it stopped him thinking. So there'd be no doubt, and there'd be no. And this is interesting because this moves into kind of the types of training that you're doing, dealing with a completely different demographic to professional sport, but you bring in the same kind of modalities, methods across into it, whether you're conscious of that or not. But you're going, look, I'm doing this to move something away or to distract my mind away from that negative kind of talk that seems to be cropping up in my head, or that's negative in context of what I want the outcome to be, right? So tell us a little bit about, you know, how you're taking all of these things that obviously you're applying very much to yourself and taking these to these big groups of, you know, corporates at varying levels. You know, are you dealing with CEOs here? Are you dealing with people in the mail rooms? You know, and how is it different depending on where in that tier that you're dealing with these people?
Yeah, I think the success of, well, first of all, we don't typically define leadership as any act, big or small, that can either inspire or motivate yourself or others to do good things consistently.
Okay.
So it I guess the key words in there are any act, big or small. It could be for yourself or for others. And there is that inspiration piece that allows people to do good things consistently. So there is a consistency side of there anyway. And so, you know, when we go into corporates, it really is about like personal leadership, you know, rather than just dealing with a CEO or a senior leader. We do find that the success of any program that we do is when there is a consistent message coming from the top down. Because if you're just doing senior leadership, you know, then there can be that like, oh, you know, she's been on a course last week, here we go, type of mentality or thing coming up with from people below, because they don't have the awareness or learning. So what we try and do is we try and get it across a corporation, and that might be a 12-month rollout, but definitely you can't have one without the other. So you can't have like middle managers necessarily doing it without the senior leaders, because then it just becomes a giant bitch session as to how, you know, oh, well, it's good, we can do stuff at our level, but it's not going to matter because they don't understand or they don't get it. So if we can try and do it from top down or bottom up, it actually doesn't matter, because within that definition of leadership, you actually have people wanting to work on themselves first. Because the idea is if you work on yourself first, all right, so in life, the only thing that you have any control over is this cardboard cutout of whatever space and mass you take up on this planet Earth.
Yeah.
That is it. That's it. You can't control your kids. You can influence them. You can't control, you know, what's going to happen for you in the day. Maybe you can influence it. Maybe some things are of concern, you know, but it is that idea of, you know, Stephen Covey and his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and the Circles of Control, Influence, and Concern. Like the only thing you can control is yourself. So if we can get everybody within an organization, like
Yeah.
spinning on their own little dial, trying to work on themselves, then collectively that group synergy like raises tenfold.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter in which direction. So most corporates these days are trying to lose the hierarchical kind of I am manager, therefore you need to listen to me. Because what we're finding is that, like, particularly with millennials, sense of purpose, meaning, and onwards, it doesn't really resonate. So there's that Maxwell saying, nobody cares what you know until they know how much you care, or nobody cares how much you know until they know how much
Yep.
you care. You know, it's very much more on the people side of things these days, because task is the new black. So you being good at your job as a manager is no longer something that people bow down to you for. Because if you're good at your job and ticking the boxes and getting the to-do list done and holding the meetings and sending the right emails, people are like, well, big deal. Because if you're an asshole, that has a bigger impact on me in my workday than whether or not you get through your to-do list. So we try and drive the soft skills, knowing that they're actually the hard skills. And what we find is that if the people work on themselves, they will drive a culture at work, and it is the culture that drives the performance.
And do you think that's came about because, you know, again, going back generations, it's been led this way into there becomes this management and this hierarchy within a corporate and a business. And now there's almost this rebellion against it where people are going, you know, and you mentioned something there, which, you know, I've heard repeated multiples of times, where people are saying, look, we can get talent from anywhere. We can get managers who are great at their job. We can get them who've got these skills and the education and the ability and the tick box stuff. But what we need to employ is people who can communicate with others. And again, communication is a massive thing now, isn't it? It's, you know, communication is kind of this lost art, this skill of being able to communicate with other people, which you can have a manager, again, ticking all those boxes and doing all those things that the corporate want. But then ultimately they're not communicating with the people that are not necessarily below them, but that are in their kind of network, and they need to, you know, manage and move into different roles, right?
And it's tough as well, because it's not just communication. You know, you can kind of, everybody knows, like, oh, there's body language and there's tone and inflection and there's the words you use and the different percentages that kind of build out the pie chart. But there's communication that is individual to every single person that you come across. Yeah, because if you take that kind of cookie cutter one size fits all, you're going to end up falling on your flat on your face for probably 89% of the conversations they actually have. So it's being able to be smart enough to rock up in the right way for that instant, for that person.
Yeah.
And that's a much deeper level of learning and awareness that most people don't have, because they will just go in with, well, this is me, this is who I am, take it or leave it. Yeah, I'll leave it.
And I know that some of that framework that you're kind of bringing to these corporates is this ability to almost assess people and ascertain who they are, how they respond to feedback, you know, what's the best type of feedback to give someone. And, you know, I always go back on the one where, you know, if you tell someone they're no good at something, you've got kind of these two nether ends of the spectrum, where you've got one person that will prove you completely wrong and the other person will go, yeah, totally believe you. And they'll just go away and believe that, you know, you've told them they're no good at something, and they just accept the fact and go, yeah, you're probably right. And there's those kind of two degrees of this, but you're taking this into more finite detail and going, right, we're going to interpret all of these different characteristics of this multitude of people. And then we're going to teach you on each tier within a corporate entity how to manage these people and communicate with these people and get them to work together better. And again, fill in those gaps that you talked about before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got DISC, which most people know about, you know, which looks at personality types, recognition of personality types, and then how each likes to be communicated with, and how you can better match your style to somebody else who doesn't necessarily have that style for a better outcome. There's HBDI, which is actually a thinking preference. So in decision making, problem solving, and also communication, the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument shows you exactly what is your style of preferred thinking there's no better or worse. What's great about it, but also what are some of the limitations that you might leave out? So for like me, as an example, I tend to go more on the kind of emotional and structural side of things. Yeah. So I think about, well, if I write that email, what's the emotional response that the other person might have? If I hold a workshop in a certain way, what's the outcome that I want them to feel from a kinesthetic emotional side of things? And then what's the structure? All right. So the structure being like, what are the nuts and bolts? If I was holding a workshop, I'd need a completely detailed plan, minute by minute, of what's going to happen. You know, what are we going to discuss? What PowerPoint slides do I need? You know, what's the registration letter going to look like? When does it get sent? You know, all that step-by-step approach. Where I resonate least, though, is in the top right, which is in the yellow, where it's that very kind of broad thinking, intuitive, conceptual, big picture people. And I work with somebody like that who's so good at it. Like they're just all good, but it's all in their head. And I'm like, if you ever want to get this stuff out of your head and down onto paper so that you can actually sell it, you know, that's why we tend to work quite well together.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm not as good as him at that. And then there's the other side on the blue of like the really kind of analytical, structural, not structural, sorry, analytical, maybe the financial side of things, looking at statistical analysis, more the Excel spreadsheet as opposed to the Word document. You know,
Yep.
you put an Excel spreadsheet in front of me and I'd literally shut down. You put a Word document in front of me and I'm like, okay, what are we creating? What are we getting to write here? So it's understanding like, what's your preference? Again, no good, bad, or ugly. It's just, what is your preference? What are the preferences of others? And how might you best kind of, I guess, identify, work with each other so that you get a better outcome? And then you got the lifestyle inventory that I talked about, which is those 12 thinking and behavior styles. So we do an LSI1 with people or with corporates, to understand what it is that they think. So LSI1 measures your thinking. You fill it out on yourself. It's about 264 questions. And then LSI2 is 360. So we give the same thing to 10 to 12 of your cohorts, be it up, side, or down in the food chain.
Okay.
We get them to feedback into you. So you get this kind of comparison of, this is how I think about myself. LSI2 measures behavior. So these guys can't read your mind. So what they can do is interpret the behavior, and people will go, okay, well, yes, my intention matches my outward behavior. These match.
Yep.
Or you get this, where it's like, I treat myself really poorly. Yeah. I'm my own worst critic. I'm super harsh on myself. And these people are like, oh, you need to lighten up. You know, you're highly constructive.
Yeah.
Or you get that. People think they're rock stars. And these guys are like,
Not so much.
You might want to head back to the drawing board and revise some of that thinking. And so it can actually be a little bit confronting. But again, if you come at it with the growth mindset where it's all just great feedback, then the question then begs, well, what the hell are you going to do about it? And the great thing about having a metric is you can keep going back year on year and remeasuring, hoping that the movement over years heads towards that more constructive style, which research shows is everything that we want out of leadership.
So the process for you then, I assume, to avoid that confrontational aspect of it, is, do you look at people's mindsets first and try and shift them a little bit and get them thinking in this positive manner, in that we're going to probably criticize some of you here, and you need to take that on board as a positive light, right? It's like,
it's only criticism if you take it as criticism, and that is the growth
how you
mindset.
frame it, right?
And it is part of the fixed mindset. I don't like receiving information because it makes me feel less. Well, A, it's a feeling, and B, it's a choice. You know what I mean? Whereas now, if I see it, I'm like, okay, let's get to work. Like, if that's the feedback, then let's get to work.
Yeah, there must be.
Maybe I don't agree. Maybe I agree. Yeah, maybe I agree with it, or maybe I don't agree with it. In which case, if I don't agree with it, I'm going to have the conversation, and we encourage people. Look, if you don't like some of this, like, go back and have the conversation. If you had 10 people fill it out and the results are anything less than where you'd want them to be, go find out why they are the way they are. Now we give them a complete itemized thing of, other people feeding back to them, but they might agree with it and they might not agree with it. If they don't agree with it, go ask.
And do you think
And
that going back to, kind of you when you used to teach and you're clearly very, very good at what you did and you were getting all this praise from everywhere. Do you think you lacked people who would, again, let's use the loose term of criticize you or give you cues to improve as an individual in what you did? You just didn't.
No, we always got feedback. Every convention session, they'd send us
feedback. So
they'd send us the feedback.
Everybody would line up and say, "You're amazing. You're amazing. You're amazing."
Yeah, like, look, you always had. I mean, thankfully for me, it's funny. You do get to the point. Like, I got to the point now. I can remember I did a BOSU workshop years ago, and like, it's just that thing, isn't it? Like 300 people in the room, and I did one move called a donkey kick, where you put your hands on the BOSU and you kick your legs out the back.
Yep.
And this guy just ripped me. So 300 people in the room, 297 of those, like 5 stars, 2 bit average. One guy like just rips me one. And it's like, didn't take time to set up that move, would never do that move on a BOSU. Like, what's the value in this? Looking at the form of the people. And all I did was go, okay. So in that split moment, you kind of go, and this is the difference. Like 15 years ago, I would have been devastated by that because it would have like ruined my perfect score, or I would have sat with it. It's that idea that you always look at the one person who's not having a good time, or you think is not having a good time, or whatever it is. But eventually you just get to the point of, and you must find this on social media, it's like, okay.
I have a 1-star review on my podcast that haunted me for a long time when I first launched my podcast. And I haven't done a podcast for a long time, and this is kind of, me going back to podcasting, but there was one person who said, it doesn't know what he's talking about, various other bits and pieces that, I remember what their handle was. And, out of all the great reviews I had, this was this one. And I remember what the name was they'd left, and I hunted, on Google to see if I could find because they were behind this facade of this name. It wasn't their actual name, and I'm like, I wonder who this is, and how dare they, and blah blah blah. But again, it's that thing of, obviously this guy's complained about you doing this donkey kick, and was there anything constructive that you could take from it? If there was, great. But in this scenario, there was just nothing constructive I could take from it. There was
but
nothing.
But also, like for the donkey kick thing, I was like, yeah, I probably did. Like in the context of it is a move, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I probably did move quickly into it because I got a truckload of material to get through. I got 90-minute session. I got 300 people in front of me. You're trying to herd cats. It's like, yeah, I probably didn't take enough time because I knew in the context of 90 minutes just how much I had to get through. So, okay. Yeah, food for thought.
And you're coaching hundreds of people with really a bunch of loose rules that need to apply to everybody. This is like the
like if it doesn't
scenario, really, it's it's brought about.
If it doesn't work for you and your clients, don't use it. Yeah. But also it's that flip side of like, I need to let you know. I need to let you know what I thought of that donkey kick, and I just go. Like, whatever. Like, you just can't take. Yeah, you can't take any of it on board anymore because everyone's got their opinion. Some of them are valid. I always read it. I always listen. But right now, I think the people that I'm getting feedback from, I think if you do what I do and you know what I know, then I tend to work upwards, and then the other stuff I have a bit of a filter. Like I could do an 8-hour training day and people are like, amazing day. In a sea of 10s, there's one person that gives you a 6 and they're like, food could have been better. Okay, well, like I'm not in charge of the catering, but fine. Or you might get literally, you'll go, one feedback form will say, so great to have the right amount of time all afternoon to take a deep dive into the report. Didn't have enough time, would love to have more time to take a deep dive into the report.
Yeah.
It's not anything that I can be in control of other than knowing what I have to do in the day, managing the energy of the group, being there to like make sure that the report is clear, and then time is time. One person finishes stuff, one person doesn't finish stuff. It's like, can I control that? No. Can I influence it? Maybe. Is it of concern to me? Yeah, it's food for thought next time.
And I think that's that carries over into social media, doesn't it? Now, where people are, they look at social media and they'll get 100 comments which are great, and then that one thing, and they let it play on them, right? They let it play on them, and they let it, affect their behaviors, right? You've got people who put out great
this is
content.
me last week. I put up some random thing on Facebook that said like, if you think your glass is half full, pour it into a glass half the size and stop bitching. Basically saying like, yeah, oh my God, that's so funny. Oh my God, I'm going to so use that. That's hilarious. So needed to hear that. One guy just went like, I don't know who you think you are, but when you use the word you're talking about 7 billion people on planet Earth. People are dealing with genocide, famine, blah, 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 and you're nothing but an outstretched arm, Dalai Lama wannabe who did it. Delete, block, and we're done.
And we're done.
And we're done. It's like there's nothing I can do about you and your crusade when in fact you've missed the exact point of it, saying we're not in genocide. We're not in famine. You, me, the people around me. So if you are bitching and moaning, remember people who actually are in all of those things, and be happy and grateful for what you've got. So the fact that he actually missed the entire point of what the post is about, I couldn't be bothered explaining it to him because it would just set off a complete email chain of whatever. And at the end of the day, he probably won't get it. So delete, block, you're gone. There's plenty of other people that you can resonate with.
Do you ever reach out to these people? Are there ever people where they make some kind of comment? I had one a while ago where somebody actually, they started commenting on our pictures. So they kind of commented on one of my kind of business-based posts, and I don't put a lot about my sort of family and things like this on my business channels for obvious reasons. And he'd managed to troll through. I said troll, not troll. He managed to troll through basically post after post after post, going back almost, more than a year, and wrote some really offensive things about my family and the odd picture that were there about them. And at that point, I was like, well, I've got two choices here. I can be either super angry at this and I can go on some kind of tirade and throw something back, and it's ultimately going to get me nowhere because I don't know who this guy is, I don't know where he's from, blah, blah, blah. Or on the other hand, I can go, and I dropped him an inbox and I said to him, I said, look, I don't know what's going on. I said, I don't know what what's going on in your world and blah, blah, blah. And I just sort of reached out to him and said, is there a problem? Is there anything that I can help with? Because, to me, it's like bullies, right? Bullies, the problem nearly always stems with them, is that they're going through something somewhere along the line, somewhere in their life, and they're just projecting this onto you, right? So I thought, well, given what I know about that, I'm just going to ask him. So I asked him, and he actually, spilled this whole thing about his family and this, that, the other, and ultimately just vented to me. And he went and he deleted all these comments that he'd made, and he just apologized, and that was it. And in that moment, I think, I probably made him feel a bit better because he just had someone that he could vent to instead of going randomly around social media hurling abuse at people. So do you ever reach out to these people and think, maybe that is someone who actually just maybe wants just an ear, or wants to, talk about something in a bit more detail, or maybe just doesn't get it, and maybe I can explain it to them. Whereas the other people, like you just described, where you're like, they're definitely not going to get it.
If I have time.
Yeah.
Like genuinely. And to be honest, I don't get it that often.
Yeah.
In fact, at all, because most of the stuff pretty harmless, and I think most of the people in my networks are just familiar. So I wouldn't have even known how this particular guy saw it. And in this instance, I didn't. The thing is like in a workshop training, in something that's in a live setting,
Yeah.
120%. If there's pushback, it's like, okay, let's spend a bit of time here. What is it? I'll push a button, I'll ask a question, and you'll get the same kind of venting, and you get to what the real cause of the problem is. On social media, it's like, I don't get it often enough to really have a good solid answer for that.
Yeah, and I mean, this was very, very random for me to actually return anything. Generally, I follow the same ethos that you do: is that delete, block. Because it's a time thing, right? Is that you want to spend your time doing things productive and constructive, and you want to stay in that realm, right? It's very easy to slide into something that isn't really beneficial to anybody, right?
And the internet is big enough, like social media is big enough, that if you don't like it, it doesn't resonate with you. You don't need to educate me, and probably I don't need to educate you if you're happy in your little sphere. So go find somebody who values wise and beliefs wise shares your values, shares your beliefs. Plenty of people out there who'll be able to do that for you. Good luck.
So on a previous conversation, we talked about how you look at kind of pace of work versus pace of life. And obviously there's this, one isn't really keeping up with the other, right? And a lot of the work that you do is all about this, getting people to keep up with that pace of life, and how that changes, and life gets faster and faster and faster, and obviously tying in the work with it. And this kind of overreaching factor of not just sort of mindset, the leadership stuff, the self-actualization stuff, the stuff that, is brought from Maslow, the self-esteem stuff, all the stuff that you've kind of talked about already. But then you also have this overarching thing of physical, mental, and this sort of complete well-being. So, what's your take on that, and how does that come about, and how do you fit that in? Because obviously you come from a background of fitness. You've kept yourself in shape for most of your life. You're probably pretty well most of the time. How does that then carry over into what you're teaching these people?
Well, that there is, particularly when it comes to resilience. So we're looking at resilience being that definition of how far do you actually bend before you break, and how well do you handle any kind of adversity that is beyond just the normal life challenges that you might expect in day-to-day life.
Yeah.
So one thing that is apparent is that people, if they're doing anything, so out of the 4 realms, if you like, of overall wellness, being spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical, if they're doing any of that, they might just be doing one at best. So they might kick their physical. Oh, it's New Year's resolution. I'm carrying a bit of extra weight. I'm going to hit the physical. But like they're doing it at the detriment to all the other areas. Or they might go, you know what? I'm going to try and express and look at, like, I'll get some coaching, and then they go down this rabbit hole with the whole mental and emotional side of things, but then they neglect the physical. So you just tend to see that it's not a lot of people percentage wise that actually have all 4 or focus on all 4. And that's the focus of these days, is to bring all 4 to their awareness. And then the next step is, how do we actually come up with some kind of resilience training plan? So just as they might see somebody or a personal trainer for a physical personal training plan, how do we actually come up with resilience and literally program in, just as you would in a PT plan, program in stuff around all 4 areas of wellness. And then it's like throwing mud at a wall. If you get enough things in there, maybe 1 or 2 things will stick that will resonate with you, that over time become consistent habits. And then, it builds up and up and up.
And do you find this is, where in that ladder is this the most extreme? Because obviously I can imagine that a lot of the CEOs and things that you deal with have a lot of neglect in their life, right? Everything is all about the business. Everything is all about, it's this singular focus on this one thing at detriment to all these other things. And, I always found it with people that would have some kind of reckoning, that have a heart issue, or that have something in their life that would cause them to go, whoa, I need to slow down here, and I need to allocate a bit of time to my physical well-being and start to look after my, myself on a physical level. And obviously that was what, my background was always around the physical side of things. And, how do people look after their nutrition? How do they look after their exercise, their physical selves? And you get these people who would have this reckoning, right? Have this moment where, and a lot of these people came from the top of the corporate ladder. These were people who'd been spending 10 years relentlessly pursuing this, be it a financial goal or be it some kind of recognition goal or whatever it was. And they'd be pursuing it. And, there'd be 2 or 3 marriages down and whatever else. And they just neglect all this other stuff in pursuit of this one thing. So where do you find there's this biggest disconnect between these 4 aspects of well-being, right?
I think it is between mental and physical. Well, I find mental tends to stimulate emotional. Yeah, because you think something, it sets up an emotional feeling or response, and then people act on that response for a particular outcome. So the link between mental and physical are quite closely aligned. But I find the disconnect tends to be between mental and no, sorry, I got that totally wrong. Mental and emotional. Yeah. Because you think something, it causes you to feel something, you then go and do something, and that gives you the outcome. I find the biggest disconnect to be between the mental, thereby emotional, and the physical.
Okay.
So most people will be so stressed, and stress is something that is like just kind of present to any degree, and how that stress manifests typically will affect the physical. So it either results in like eating, or, people don't understand the importance of exercise as like, a way of dealing with stress and with mental health. And so I find that to be the biggest disconnect between mental and physical.
Okay.
And that's where you get a lot of like, pharmaceuticals coming in. Oh, I've been to the doctor because I'm anxious or I'm stressed or I'm this. He's prescribed that. She's told me to go and do this. And I think that becomes the biggest problem.
And so how do you address these people? Do you just go, look, first they have to outline what the problem is and they have to accept it? I mean, is it like a typical sort of Alcoholics Anonymous scenario where the person has to admit there's a problem there before they start to deal with it?
Yeah, I mentioned the company Human Synergistics before. So they do the LSI. They've also got a stress processing report, the SPR. So just as a circumplex for LSI has 12 thinking behavior styles, the SPR has 18 domains that all look at stress. So we get them to do that before they come onto the training day. We go through their results. It has a complete self-development guide of if you are extending out to a great extent, higher than average in any of these 18 domains, here's a whole list of things that you can do. So the first port of call is always, always, always that awareness. When you literally get hit with some visual of here's how you're doing in this area, particularly around stress, you can at least start to go, oh, okay. Like I knew it was stress, but I didn't know exactly how much in this area or where the stress was coming from or how it was resonating. And now that I can see that, I can now start to piece together, it's probably the reason for this. I can see now how it is the bridge for me behaving in this certain way and doing this stuff, which I recognize is not great for me. So we do a stress processing report. And then we just spend the afternoon kind of in the resilience training program doing things like Wim Hof breathing, the personal training plan, giving them the cold therapy shower challenge. We go through an amazing TED talk with Lucy Hone, Hone. You can look that up. It's on resilience. She was one of the key resilience experts. That's at TEDx in Christchurch. Just kind of going, okay, well, here's the problem. Here's why things can be so problematic. Here's the diagnostic in the middle. So you can see how you're doing in relation to all of that. And, knowing that most of us have some level of stuff that we all need to work on, we can now start getting into the action piece in the afternoon. And like I said, just getting as much down on paper, put it into action. Some stuff will stick, some stuff will fall by the wayside, but at least the stuff that sticks will move the dial forward into more of what you want.
So if this all sounds very complex in many respects. I'm sure you could probably simplify it in many regards, which is what I'm going to ask you next. So for all the people listening, obviously there's a lot of detail here. There's a lot of stuff that they need to take on board. And there's a lot of stuff that they can probably address and start to look into, and etc.
They want to take it on board, Phil. They want to take it.
They want to take it on board. Was that bad language from me?
Yeah, well, they don't need to do anything. Absolutely. It's like the idea of like they should take it on board. They don't need to. They don't have to. And that's the point. That's the point of they probably won't. If you tell them they need to, they probably won't. If they come to the realization, like people are only going to do what they actually learn for themselves. If they get to the point where they go, I want to do this, then they'll go and do it.
Right. So they want to.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of stuff in this podcast that people will want to go away and take a really good look at and get started with. Because telling them they need to do it will be like, yeah, thanks, Phil, but like I got my own.
There's loads of things I need to do in this life. Right. So the things they want to do.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, what would be the approach that you would give someone? So if obviously somebody who doesn't have access to all of these resources that you have, and obviously access to yourself, obviously they can find you online, they can, make use of those resources, but we could be talking to thousands and thousands of people here, which I'm sure you'd probably be quite happy with. But nevertheless, if we were to put this into kind of a nutshell as to what would be the things that you would suggest that people go away and do for themselves right now that could potentially help them on this pathway and help them kind of come to this better acceptance as to what they're chasing, or what their idea of success might be, or their idea of performance, or whatever it might be. So what would you tell people?
I would download Carol Dweck's book, Mindset. So that's DWECK. You
want to know something?
Yeah, it's sitting
right next to me.
There you go.
That was fun, by the way.
Yeah. I would download that book because that's an amazing book. I would probably just start taking a mental note of like the pluses and minuses within your day in terms of the internal thinking going on. So hear yourself and the types of statements that you make to yourself. And if that means just getting a pad and writing them down, like time of day, 11:06, I told myself I was fat. 12:03, I told myself I couldn't do it. 12:07, you might literally have a plus and a minus column, and just literally, where are the pluses in relation to the minuses? How could you over time get the pluses to be much, much more? Because it just it gives you a nice kind of indicator as to the frame of thinking. I think the other thing that you can do is look at developing that personal training plan for yourself, literally just getting a bit of paper and dividing it into 4. So physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental. So mental is your thinking. So I just gave you an example of the pluses and minuses. The physical is looking at like even if it's not training, just activity. How much are you doing? Movement, what types? On the emotional side, what could you be doing? Gratitude, I mentioned before, is just a very simple one to get started. So first thing in the morning, last thing at night. And then on the spiritual side, it's not really like, you have to go to church on Sunday morning. It's more around like connecting with your purpose and the meaning. So coming back to that question that we talked about before, what do you actually want? Like, what do you want? What do you want in a relationship? What do you want in your career? What do you want in your bank balance? Like, define what it is that you want. So at least you got a little bit of clarity around that. So and just one thing in each of those 4.
And write them down, right?
Yeah, literally just draw a big circle on a page, divide it into 4, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, and then just one thing in each. And then you might have a separate page for each. So it's like a 5-page exercise. Yeah. First page, bit of a summary, page on physical, page on mental, page on spiritual, page on emotional. And then, just get started with something.
Amazing. I think we could talk for a long time on each one of these individual topics that we've kind of, broached on, and obviously dig a little bit more into your background, your history, because I think that will be interesting as well as to, how you've gone on your own little personal journey and amongst all of this. But
there's always a next time, Phil.
There is, yes, there always is. So where can people find you, Greg? Obviously in Sydney.
Yeah, so I'm in Sydney. Facebook, Instagram, it's just at Greg Sellar, GregSellar, or you've got www.gregsellar.com. So you'll find a 30-day life hack program on there. There's a couple of other things. If anyone wants to do their LSI and have a couple of individual coaching sessions around that, looking at the actual results, and then going through a couple of coaching sessions on the back of that as to how we actually implement and get into a point of action around the results. Same with HBDI and the thinking preferences. I can set that up. If there's any corporates out there, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. I mean, I'm doing most of the kind of 4 or 8 hour days, or it could just be a 90-minute masterclass on any of this stuff. Then it's all online on Zoom. So it doesn't matter if you're in the UK or in US or down in this neck of the woods. That's all easy to get set up, and they're all good to go.
Cool. We'll share all your links so people can find you and learn a little bit more about you. Maybe in the future we'll get some more sort of material off you, and to help with our guys, sort of all the listeners to be able to develop their own sort of stuff, and maybe a little bit more structure around their days and things like that. So that would be super cool. But Greg, just want to say thank you very much for getting up early and preparing for this podcast. It's very late here in the UK. So thank you very much once again, and we will touch base soon.
Cool. Thanks, Phil. Good to talk to you.
Cool. Thanks for your time.